make sure we have enough time. So hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kate Lyons, Director of Community Relations at Carroll County Memorial Hospital. So welcome to our second educational forum where we'll be focusing on how to talk to teens about suicide and grief today. We are very grateful to be able to offer these virtual events to the community, especially during these challenging times right now. Although last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, we felt that this topic was still very relevant and timely, so we definitely wanted to focus on it. If you did attend the first event, I apologize, some of this intro will be a repeat, but I do like to start how the effort got started. So Tracy Wozni, which most of you probably know, with Shape, Stance, and Acro and Taking Shape, brought her inspiration to help youth to several of us other local organizations here in town, basically to turn her idea into a reality. So the other groups that are involved in this collaboration are Burrell Behavioral Health, Carroll County Area YMCA, Carroll County Chamber of Commerce, Carroll County Coalition, Carroll County Health Department, and Carroll County Memorial Hospital. Lots of Carroll counties going on. So I wanted to mention quickly that the Carroll County Coalition is a newly formed group within the last couple of years. Their mission is to unite change makers, build communities, and address mental health and substance use disorder. So today's event that we're doing serves as one of their projects. So we're glad to be able to partner with them. And then before I introduce our speakers, I would like to just go over a few quick reminders. Please remember to keep yourselves muted, although we can actually do that on our end. If you have questions for the speakers, please just type those into the chat box, and you can do that at any point throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait until the end. You can either send those to me directly, Kate, or to the whole group for everyone to be able to see. Either way is fine. We will monitor the questions and then answer as many as we are able to at the end in the 45 minutes that we do have today. So I will try not to talk too much longer, but I will go ahead and give the intros. Brianna Townsend will start us off today. Brianna grew up in Carrollton her entire life. She has her bachelor's degree in social work and is working on obtaining her master's in social work to become a licensed clinical therapist. Her role as prevention coordinator at Compass Health has allowed her to work at the Carroll County Coalition for over a year to bring awareness of mental health and substance use to the Carroll County community. And then we've got Christy Crawford. She'll be our second presenter. If you attended our first event, you would have heard her speak then. Christy works for Burrell Behavioral Health and has 19 years of experience in working in mental health, from case management to crisis intervention to therapy. She obtained her master's degree in community counseling at Missouri Valley College and is currently working at Burrell Behavioral Health as a supervisor of the CPRC case management program and part-time therapist. Christy is a member of the Carroll County Coalition as well, and it has always been her hope to return to the community to work and help residents. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it off to Brianna.
Hello, everybody. I am Brianna. So I am just quickly, I'm going to talk first, and I'm going to share my, I need to share my screen, please, Kara. I just tried and it said no. But I am going to share my screen kind of to go over this. It's called The Purple Book, and we have plenty of resources. You guys should have got an email about it right before the meeting. But if not, we can send it out again afterwards. I have plenty of resources that are honestly so valuable that we cannot go over in 45 minutes. And some of this stuff is more intentional when you read it like one-on-one to yourself as well. So we're going to go over that today shortly. I'm going to just kind of briefly go over it, and then I'll pass it off to Christy, and she's going to talk about talking to teens and youth about suicide. So this is what the book looks like. It's called The Purple Book. It's a handbook survivors of suicide. It is very, very in-depth. As you can see just by the table of contents, it has 29 pages. I am not going to go over all of that with you. I'm going to kind of just briefly talk about how suicide is different than a lot of other deaths, and I'll explain that in a second. And then we'll talk about some facts and myths, because I feel like a lot of people learn a lot in that. I am mental health first aid certified. I am an instructor with that, and we specifically towards youth as well. So that we do this during one of our courses, and it's very interesting to see some of the perspectives of some of the participants. So if you guys see like a myth or a fact that you disagree with or would like more like explanation on, go ahead and put that in the chat and I'll talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and start, which is kind of like introduction and why suicide itself is different. So very first, there's so much guilt and stigma around it. Very much so. As a person, as a survivor, the suicide survivor that experiences it, you feel a lot of guilt because there's always feels like there's something you could have done. The stigma as well. So when we talk about suicide, there is a new thing we are trying to do, that we are trying to eliminate like stigmatizing language. So instead of saying commit suicide, we say die by suicide or passed away by suicide. Because commit, when you think of commit, the very first thing that comes to your mind typically is commit a crime. Like committing is usually a bad word. That means that something bad has happened, like you've committed adultery, or no one says adultery anymore, but like you've committed a crime or something. And so it's a bad term. And so that leads to a lot of judgment. Unfortunately, sometimes when people pass by suicide, the families like to keep it very hush at how this person has passed because of the guilt and stigma around it. There could be judgment. And unfortunately, as we all probably know, small towns can sometimes feel like a lot more judgmental during certain things because we're way closer together and everyone knows everybody. So sometimes it can feel a little bit more judgmental, even though sometimes it's not. It's just perspective. But guilt and stigma and anger is very, very important. So I would ask you guys to try that in your own speech whenever you're talking with people outside, bringing it up to your kids or your students. If this ever comes up, I would ask you to try and change that in your day-to-day talk. Don't use the word commit. Just try to say like passed by suicide or died by suicide, because those kinds of small things will make small changes, positive changes over time. So this one is also very important to know, is the emotional roller coaster because of the anger and disconnections. I like that this section right here is when we lose a loved one to a disease or an accident, it's easier to retain happier memories. And we know that if they could have chose to be here with us, that they would have. But unfortunately with suicide, it feels like that's not the case, that they chose the opposite. They had made the decision not to be there. So it's a very big state of conflict, and it makes grief incredibly, incredibly difficult. Some people have been very blessed to not know what it feels like to lose someone to suicide. But even if you've never felt that, it's important to know, because eventually it's unfortunately, there's a very high rate that it will happen to either you or someone you know, and just being prepared is important. So the emotional roller coaster, this is just something very much to address, especially when talking to youth about suicide and acknowledging their behaviors during this time. It's something that you have to confront, especially when it comes to this stigma and guilt, because it could be your best friend, it could be your grandparents, it could be anybody, and as much angry as you have to be able to allow them to confront it in a very healthy way. And this kind of just talks about grief and the backslides and the reminders that they experience. So this goes very much in depth. And that's why I really love this purple book, and I wanted this to be something we shared, because it even goes into holidays and milestones that can bring you guilty, that make you feel guilty. Because my friend lost a friend to suicide, her like 2 years ago. And that's one thing she struggles with, is when she reaches new milestones, she's supposed to be sharing it with one of her best friends, and she's no longer there. And so there's some types of guilt. But they give you like nice tips and tricks on the side that can prepare you. So I'll leave that too. I'll go down to, before I go to that, I'll just explain this. So this talks about specifically why they use Suicide Survivor. The emotional roller coaster, explaining it to children, shock, talks about suicide being like, is it a choice? It goes into depth really about that, which I find very interesting. And then just very much kind of like the stages of grief, it goes all the way down that until support. And I will go on to suicide facts and myths, and Christy is going to talk about how to actually talk to your loved ones about this. Make sure I go to the right page. Okay. All right, so some suicide facts and myths. These are also very important just to know. So I like it better when it hides the facts and myths, but I can't really do that because I'm sharing my screen with you. But it is actually a fact that nearly 30,000 Americans die by suicide each year. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the nation, claiming twice as many lives as HIV and AIDS. So one thing I would like to point out, very obvious by statistics, but most of these I've read up about this before. This is a little bit out of date. Suicide for youth is the second leading cause of death with youth and adolescents. That it ranges 13 to, I haven't thought about it in a while, but it's adolescents, and that is not correct on here. So, but it is still a fact that male suicides outnumber female suicides 4-1. That, unfortunately, that means that male suicides they die by suicide more often, while females attempt suicide more often. But it mentions here the reason for that is because men tend to use more fatal means. So they tend to use like guns, for example, more often than women. Women tend to go towards pills more. They have a higher likelihood of using pills to die by suicide. Myth: teenagers are more likely to kill themselves. In fact, it's white males over 65 that are most people likely to die by suicide. So, and it is, I do like that it mentions that the suicide rate for males 15 to 24 has tripled since 1950, and it's more than doubled, and it just has continued to rise. With that being said, so is white males over 65. That is why in some of these rural areas, you've started to see, there's one in Carrollton, I've seen it as a sign with like a older man on it talking about suicide. And it's because farmers, there has been more data that show like older male farmers, their rates of suicide have skyrocketed. And they think the only way to do this is try to get it more education into these small rural communities about it. It's actually kind of like a new but it's a new thing that's happening with data, and it's pretty sad. Backed up to 75% of all people who die by suicide may suffer from an illness such as depression or bipolar disorder. I wanted to bring this one up because this one is not true anymore. It's the same thing that they're kind of discovering with COVID now, that a lot of people that have died, they test them for COVID after their death and realized that even though they may have died from a car accident, they still tested positive for COVID. That means they're writing it down that like it could have been a COVID death, which is not accurate at all. This is not actually proven to be true. They used to think it is true, and it is not proven to be true. Myth: if there was no note, then it couldn't have been a suicide. Only 1 in 4 or 5 people that die by suicide leave a note. That's not actually a thing that happens. I'm just going to jump around from these ones. Myth: people who talk about dying by suicide don't actually do it. That is a huge myth. A lot of people use it as especially youth in that culture, in the youth culture. It's like self-deprecating humor is huge. So many people talk about it or joke about it and they laugh about it, but in fact that is something to be aware of. That's not something to just laugh and brush off your shoulder. Maybe if you hear your youth talking about it with their friends over something, bring it up and ask them about it seriously, because that could be something that they're trying to cope with by using humor. And millennials and Gen Z are very much in self-deprecating humor. That's what their kind of culture is. Fact: firearms are now used in more suicides than homicides. Myth: suicide is hereditary. I remember kind of hearing this when I was really young, that there was a suicide gene. That is not true at all. You are at a greater risk though if a family member has died by suicide, but that the reason isn't really clear. I have a feeling it's probably a result of trauma and dealing with that trauma. Fact, up to 15% of all fatal car accidents may be suicides according to some experts, but that one is very hard to argue. We could argue that one. And once a suicidal person has passed, the suicidal crisis, has passed, the person is out of danger. That is not correct. You still want to be able to, the mood can change. One thing with suicides it's very important to keep in mind is that right before a suicide, their behavior can, they could be going to be really, really sad, and then all of a sudden someone wakes up one day and they're really happy and they seem calm. That is usually not a good sign. That means that they have accepted and are fine with the fact that they have chosen to end their life. And so that is, if you see someone that you love that you know have been struggling for a very long time, suddenly start acting completely fine and maybe giving away possessions or just saying like odd things, that is a warning sign to be aware of. And I'll go in with the last one. Most people kill themselves during winter or Christmas holidays, and that is actually a myth. Usually, even though Christmas is a high time, so is the spring as well. The spring is a very high time for that. So there are a lot of these that I find to be very important. One last thing before I toss it over to Christy is I would like to say that when you are talking to somebody or you bring up suicide with a youth, it is very, very important to use the word suicide or kill yourself. You can't say harm yourself. They don't recommend saying hurt yourself or doing something bad to yourself, because in that person's mind, that might not be bad. The decision of suicide might not be a bad thing. That doesn't count as hurting themselves in their head. So that is just something very important to keep in mind when you bring that up. And so this is a huge booklet. And if you have any other questions or just anything related to what I talked about, go ahead and put it in the comments and we'll talk about it. But as for right now, I am going to pass this over to Christy.
All right, thank you. So, there we go. So what does grief look like in teenagers? So we see kind of a mixture of different types of symptoms. It can go from overwhelming sadness to no response at all, to humor, from overachievement. We see the affecting areas of their life, like in school, we may see drop in their school grades, or we can actually see the opposite in teenagers, where they're doing overachievement with their schoolwork or other activities they participate in. Also anger, like Brianna mentioned earlier, and guilt. Also, we have to watch out for possibilities of some high-risk activities, such as drug and alcohol use, sexual activity, and other activities that increases their adrenaline. So let's break it down in different ways. So emotionally, you're dealing with some shock, numbness. There can be anger. So it could be at the person who had died, or in just with grief in general. It could be at the legal system, something medical. Along with guilt, there's fear that this will happen again, especially to someone they loved. If they know someone else like who had died from suicide, it could be someone else they know that's struggling emotionally to or have a high stress level, or if it's a medical condition that a loved one or a friend has died from, that has fear with that. There's regret. That's with our teens. When someone they love or care about dies, did they get into an argument before with that person the last time they were encountered with them? Did they not get to do something they wanted to do with them? There's insecurity, loneliness, shame could be associated with the death, especially if it's in the nature of something like suicide. Mentally, I mentioned there's difficulties concentrating and staying focused. Decision making, it's going to be hard for them to make decisions. And this is a time period you do not want them to make major decisions. So especially our older teenagers, if it pertains to going, wanting to drop out of college or not go to college, enlisting in the military, or even dropping out of their sports that they're participating in or any other activities they're involved in, or even getting rid of something important. If they're making these kind of big decisions and end up causing feelings of regret later and creating more adjustments for them at this time, and which will also can make their grief more difficult. You may see them dwelling on death or having a desire to die. This desire to die is because they may want to feel to be closer to the loved one or be out of the pain that they're experiencing. Teenagers have a lot of emotions and they feel those and they go from one extreme to the next, and that's even displayed in their everyday life to even in grief. But if your teen is having these kind of thoughts, please reach out to someone for help for them. You may also see some disbelief or denial that the person is really dead, or even some glorifying the person who had died. Oftentimes they only remember the good qualities or time spent with that person. Physically, you're going to see crying, trouble sleeping, restlessness or hyperactivity, headaches, loss of appetite or increase in appetite, weight loss or gain, lack of energy, and they may complain about pain around the heart. That's actually where heartache has come from, the word. Socially, they may feel left out, feel different, and they may withdraw from everyone, peers, family, changes in their relationship with their friends and peers. They feel like they no longer have anything common with their friends. They may even feel angry with their peers because they just don't understand, especially if they complain about the loved one who has died and the other ones are alive. Spiritually, they may lose faith or question faith. What do I believe? Where do people really go when they die? They could even have anger towards their faith system, or it could do the opposite and strengthen their faith. They may if they're not a spiritual person, they may just rediscover a faith, or they may explore other faiths that are out there. They could be searching for a meaning of life, and what that meaning of life is without their loved one. So they also may be questioning why bad things have to happen. So the 6 basic principles of teen grief is grieving is natural reaction to death. So whether it's actually a teen or a youth or adult, it's a natural part. What makes grieving so hard is because it doesn't feel natural, because we have a difficulty controlling our emotions, our thoughts, even our physical symptoms because of the emotions and thoughts that we're having. It gives us that sense of we're out of control, especially for our teenagers, and it may be overwhelming and frightening to them. So we want to make sure and let them know that grieving is normal and healthy, and so that way they don't resist it or reject grieving. If they accept that grief is normal and healthy, it allows them to work through it and progress through the grief journey. So just like adults, grieving is different for each person. It's very unique. Grief is best understood as a process in which bodily sensations, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors surface in response to a death and its circumstance. So it depends on your past relationship you had with that individual, and the realization how that's going to affect you in the future. So sadness and crying may be how one youth will respond to it. Another one may use humor and laughter. So the best way for us parents and adults who are involved with teenagers is just being there and listening, and allowing them to be our teacher on how they're functioning with their grief. There is no right way or wrong way to grieve. But however, there are helpful and unhelpful choices and behaviors associated with the grieving process. So we want to encourage facing grief, like them talking with a trusted friend, journaling, expressing emotion rather than holding it in. Because more destructive is the things that I mentioned earlier. They're going to use teens attempt to escape their pain, just like adults do, and we don't want them doing those in a negative way, such as alcohol, substance use, reckless activities, withdrawing from social activities, or excessive sleeping, those kind of things. We don't want them to try and numb the pain. So another thing to remember is teens are death is unique and experienced differently, but the grieving process is influenced by many issues too. The one thing with the death is unique and experienced differently, it relates to the teen's relationship with that person. So you may see them respond much more differently with their boyfriend or girlfriend versus a grandparent. They may show more symptoms of grief and be more lost. So it depends on the relationship that they have. And for teens, their peer relationships are extremely important to them. So the impact of death could be the social support system that the teen has available. The more support system they have, the easier and way for them to go through this. Circumstances of the death, how, where, when, and why the person died, whether this person died unexpectedly or not, did they discover the body or not, just kind of depends on different things. And then, of course, the nature of the relationship with the person who had died. Was it harmonious? Was it conflictual, unfinished? Also, the level of involvement in the dying process. If this wasn't a suicide, was this someone that had a terminal illness and they've been aware of this going on, or did they just find out? Was this like a car accident? Also, important factor is the emotional and developmental age of the teen. And then also if they've had any past experience with the thing is, grief is ongoing. There's never an end date. We don't have set dates that you are allowed to grieve only. But grief, since it never ends, but it changes. And the character and the intensity of their grief changes. A lot of grievers compare it to the shifting tides of the ocean. So ranging from calm and low tides to raging high tides that change with the seasons and the years. So like holidays, special occasions, those kind of things, you may see an increase in their grief. Talking about death to teenagers. So the thing is, tell the truth. Keep it short, simple explanation of what happened in the language they understand, and then let their questions lead you further on how much information to share. Like Brianna mentioned earlier, words matter, and especially when it comes to suicide, there is a stigma to it and shame. And so we don't want to say things will get better, or shouldn't you be over this by now? We want to say, how are you? Do you want to talk about it? Then there's the why questions. We want to explain as many factors that can lead to someone dying, either by suicide, overdose, health problems, whatever the cause may be. We want to listen to them. We want to reassure and take away their fears, but it can be more helpful to listen and really hear their worries. If you offer reassurance, please don't make promises that you're not going to be able to keep. We want to ask them, what do they need? A lot of teenagers feel like they can't ask for things because they don't feel like that it's a valid or worthy. So we want to ask, what do you think would be helpful? What can I do to help you feel safe? What can I do to help you yourself feel safer? So we don't want to lead the conversation with them. We don't want to force the conversation. And we also don't want to direct what a grieving teen should do, say, or feel, because you're just going to shut them down by doing that. And we want them to be there for them and for us. So we want to encourage that talking together, acknowledge their fears, provide solid and helpful information. And also, if depending on the cause of the death, we want to encourage them to investigate their own fears. And then we want to provide comfort. We want to make sure we have established routines. We want to offer choices to them. We want to create comfort through thoughts or images, space for them to play and be creative and to remember the person who has died. By providing support to our teens, one of the biggest things we can do is give them something to do. So there's a lot of things that we can do to help them in the grief process, and helping them by doing something in a memory of their friend or a loved one who had died. So I've listed some options like making t-shirts, writing a poem, a balloon release, a shadow box, photo wreath, planting a flower or a tree, or even just having a gathering with friends and serving that person's favorite treats, foods, drinks. Teens find comfort in active doing, and also their friends. Friends are important. They lean on their peers more than they do grown-ups and parents. So if you need help, have questions, let us know. If you have concerns or your youth is talking about suicide or making changes like Brianna mentioned earlier, please reach out. One of the things we need to remember is we don't get over death, but through it. So that is all I have. So if anybody has any questions, I'm ready.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so very much. That was great information. I have not.
You talk about and with them. Really good resource is the Doogie Center. It is actually the National Institute of Grieving Children and Families. So they have a lot of information and on there on what to expect, different situations that can be helpful too.
Awesome. Brianna, do you have anything to say or no?
Not referring to that. No, I was just looking at the next question coming in.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure before I went ahead, but I will go ahead real quick before we go to the next question. There may be people who have to leave. So before people do hop off, I wanted to go ahead and say, you know, thank you to everyone who did attend today's event. We hope to be able to offer another one in the coming months to you guys. Just stay tuned to all of our Facebook pages. We also hope that you will take a few minutes. We have a 5-question super short survey that we will be sending out to you after today's event. We would love your feedback. So if you would not mind to take that for us, we would love it. And then, as the girls said, the purple book will be sent out to you if you haven't received it yet. So thank you again. We're going to stay on for a little bit longer, but just for those who did have to leave, I want to go ahead and say, you know, say all of that information. So I will go ahead to this next question. How do you get the Stoic team to talk? That is my girl. That is my girl. Tracy is referring to one of her friends committed suicide last month. Sorry.
To promote any conversation, you want to use open-ended questions. You don't want to ask questions that you're going to get a yes or a no or I don't know. So you want to try and make sure and ask open-ended questions. But you know, you can also ask, how are you feeling? This is a small community. We know people talk. You could even someone, you know, bring up to your child that, you know, someone has said this and we're concerned about that. You know, I wanted to know if you had any concerns or if you have any questions about this or any fears or things like that. So you could bring up what was said by another parent or another child that has voiced concerns and just kind of use that as an opening door for that with your child, along with, you know, just asking, what can I do for you to make you feel safe or to help you, those kind of things. And just reassure them that you're there too. And let them know that any question they have or anything we talk about is not stupid at all. So that you're not going to judge them. You know, this is stressful and a lot's going on, and just offering them that you're going to be there for them no matter what question they ask or what they say.
Yeah, and you're also going to get some of those students that just, or youth that just don't feel comfortable talking to really anybody. So there's this, I put it in the text chat thing so everyone could see it. You could text talk or help or literally hello. You can literally text anybody and say to 741-741, and you are going to reach a real person, a real human 24/7. And this can be for supports, and a lot of teens prefer to text over talking because calling somebody can be kind of scary. But just because I know that, like, I've been in situations where I know a student or a youth is in trouble and they're kind of hinting at it, but I know that I can't be the one to help them. I'm in a school situation, so I was able to give them to their counselor, but I also very much recommended this hotline to them because I knew that 24/7 this hotline could be there, and a lot of students and youth really respond well to it. I mean, I myself have even used it, and it is a real person 24/7. Or you can call 1-800-273-8255. It's the same organization. So once again, you're going to reach a real person. I especially like it because if the person is in any trouble, they're just very well trained to speak. And if someone just stops responding, they'll call like within like 30 minutes and like try to touch base just because to check their concerns. So they follow up to make sure everything's okay. Because you are going to have some students that like maybe they don't feel like it's a safe space, or maybe they feel like even though people are asking them to talk, maybe they feel like no one wants to listen, and just even sharing those services are good too, because they can do it in the privacy of their own home if they choose to. I just really like to preach those hotline numbers because I just know too many people that they've really, really helped in times of need. So I would always share those, or they have free stickers. I think I still actually have some stickers in my office too. So if next time I'm in Carrollton, I can give a bunch to Misty or drop them off at the hospital or wherever, if you guys would like to just stick them somewhere so that like in a bathroom or wherever you guys would like, just so they're always being seen by people, just in case.
Also, with those lines and crisis lines, the hotlines that Brianna was talking to, there is a local provider that provides coverage for this area. So, so I don't know if that could be reassuring to you guys also. It's someone within the surrounding community that's on call for those type of calls.
That's great. Thank you, ladies. And if you didn't see, they did put some information into the chat boxes for you, website and National Institution of Grieving Children and Families. So be sure to check those out. And I also didn't mention that if you come up with any questions afterward, I think Kira's going to put a slide on here that has everybody's, well, Brianna and Christy's contact information, so you can reach out to them directly if you come up with any questions later on. So unless there are any other questions, which I'm not seeing, I think we will wrap it up. I appreciate both the girls' information and their time. And just all the partnerships that we have going today. It's a very important topic, and we continue to come up with other similar topics that will be helpful as well. So thank you again, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.